So up next, guys, I wanted to actually take a look at the teams that missed out on the finals and just give them a little bit of a grading. So we'll start right down at the bottom of the ladder, of course, the Richmond Tigers. And look, I mean, I know they've had a tough year. They've had a lot of injuries, had a lot of stuff like player departures being in the news throughout the majority of the year. Dusty Martin's been on and off in the news talk. But to be honest, the Tigers, even though I did expect them to be a bit of a slider this year, no way did I think they were going to get the wooden spoon. So I just have to give them an F rating. I was expecting the Tigers to probably drop down just a little bit this year after missing the finals in 2023. But it was only 2 years ago when the Tigers were in the finals. And it was, only 4 years ago since they got their third flag. So it's a really steep drop-off from the Tigers. I know Adam Uze is a new coach, so I don't put a lot of blame onto him at this stage. But yeah, I can't really put the Tigers any higher than an F rating because, yeah, they've just had a really poor year. And I know a couple of things haven't gone their way specifically, but I can't really put them up any higher than that. Looking at North Melbourne, I don't know how many people will feel about this, but I'm actually going to give them a D rating. Because I don't think many people would have had North much higher than where they finished on the ladder. And to be honest, where they were sitting on the ladder, at the bottom of the ladder, around 10 or 11, not really having too many wins, it probably would have been an F rating. But after the bye, they actually showed some decent signs. And a lot of players starting to stay with them, like Luke Davies-Uniacke, Zerha deciding to stay. And there's a lot of good improvement around the young players. Of course, Sheasel, Wardlaw, Powell, other young stars is a really good sign. So I can't go any higher than a D level for North Melbourne because they haven't done any better than last season and they finished 17th on the ladder. I mean, you can't give them much more than a D rating. It's not a failed season. I think North Melbourne definitely had some growth and I think they can definitely build on that. So I have to give them a D, but I don't think I could go any higher than that. Now, moving to West Coast, I know a lot of people may be a bit surprised, but I'm actually going to give them a C rating for this season because despite their last game of the season where they got smashed by the Cats, I think there were actually some okay times for the Eagles. Now, Harley Reid looks like an absolute star in the making. Waterman had an absolutely massive year. And I think with the injury-prone players back, like the seniors, such as McGovern, Barras, Yeo, I think the majority of their season, I think they did okay. I know that a really dreadful start to the year, those first 4 or 5 weeks. Then they had a good couple of patches throughout the year. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. And to be honest, I thought they were going to finish bottom of the ladder. And I didn't actually think they were going to win a game looking at the start of the season. I thought there was so many problems with the West Coast Eagles. But the fact that they did get a couple of wins, I think C is probably fair for them. I do think they could be a bit of a slider though next year, which is kind of, I mean, it's a weird thing to say because they're 16th. But I do think that there will be a couple of players that do leave. Like I think Barras is probably gone. We've obviously seen the retirement of Gaff as well. And I don't think Darling will be there next year either. So they do have some good young forwards. They have some good pillars up forward. And they have a pretty good ruckman in Matt Flynn if he's fit and ready to go. I just think their depth is very tested as soon as they get 1 or 2 injuries. So I think that's going to be the issue for the West Coast Eagles going forward. Now, a team that I do want to have a really deep look at is the Adelaide Crows. They obviously finished 15th on the ladder. There were so many expectations for Adelaide this year, with the previous season almost making the finals if it wasn't for a controversial decision against the Sydney Swans. And look, maybe we did put a little bit too much pressure on the Adelaide Crows going into the season, but other than what? Maybe Rankin, Fogarty, Saligo, maybe Michael Annie, a couple of defenders. Who's really, improved this year for the Adelaide Crows? I couldn't say many more than who I just mentioned. I think Isaac Rankin was very, very good, and Darcy Fogarty had some times. Phil Thorpe would have been really good if he played throughout the season, but obviously missed a lot of it through injury. But they needed what was expected of them. They needed players to reach another level, which no one really did. Like Dawson played a good season, but I think he played better last year. Rory Laird, kind of the same. Riley O'Brien, I thought was pretty good, but again, he got dropped throughout the year. I think Sam Berry had a pretty good year, but there's not a lot of young players coming through until Matthew Nicks kind of chucked them in later in the season when it was all dead and buried. Like Zach Taylor, I think, had a couple of good games, Billy Dowling, but there was no growth for the Crows, and I feel like that's a really big issue, and I'm going to have to give them an F. I mean, I thought they were going to be a real riser this year. I thought they were going to make the 8. I think I had them in 5th or 6th for the ladder ratings, and again, maybe I overthought of what the Crows were going to do, but it has to be a failure for Adelaide. They finished in the bottom 4. That is going right. That's going backwards from where everyone thought they were going to be. I mean, you compare them to Hawthorn at 7th spot, making the finals. Hawthorn were expected to be behind the Crows in their sort of rebuild or regen or whatever you want to call it. And Hawthorn have just skyrocketed past them, and the Crows, finished 15th on the ladder. Next up, I want to take a look at Melbourne. I feel like this is a pretty easy one. Obviously a failure. Now, I know they had so many injuries and countless distractions on and off the field with Petrarca, Oliver, even Viney at some points. They haven't evolved with the game. The game in the last 3 or 4 years has turned so much into a pressure offensive game, and the Melbourne Football Club are still playing so defensive, so lethargic. It's such a boring team to watch. They just won't do anything to evolve. And I know there's some there's obviously points of there's not many key forwards there. They don't have much ball movement players, but there needs to be change. And I don't think Simon Goodwin should be sacked yet, but I would say his job is on the agenda coming into the next pre-season and going out through next year, because they're a boring team to watch. They're one of the most boring teams in the comp. And look, everyone was expecting that their defence and their midfield would get them through to finals, but they failed. They got nowhere near it. They finished just above the Crows. They finished 14th in the end. This team's been in the last 2 final series and won the flag the year before that, and they missed the finals. They finished 14th on the ladder. I think they'll be better off next year with players back, Oliver having a pre-season and all that, but you can't give them any higher than an F. That is a dreadful season from Melbourne. They're probably my most disappointing team this year. Now, the Gold Coast finished in 13th spot, and they were very, very close to getting an F rating as well. The fact that their list is stacked, they have an accomplished coach now, and they've also had a very soft draw. I think everything was pointing to giving the Gold Coast Suns an F here. I was very close to doing it. The only reason why I've upgraded them to an E rating or an E grading is the fact that I do think we need to give Damien Hardwick 12 months to settle into his role. I still think you need to give him 12 months. I didn't really expect them to make the finals of the Gold Coast Suns, but definitely not anywhere near a pass mark by any means. And I do think you have to mention the fact that I know a lot of people mention their away record and only winning 2 games away from home, but the fact that they won so many games at home, and the fact that if they can keep that going into next year, I think they'll definitely be close to the finals next year for the Gold Coast. And who knows what happens with the list management and list changes through the off-season. I can't give them any higher than an E. They were very close to getting an F. I just think that you need to give Damien Hardwick 12 months. And I think there were some good signs for the Gold Coast. The fact that they, barely lost at home is such a good thing to have going into next year if they can bring that with them. Because all the Gold Coast really had to do this year is if they won 2 or 3 of their away games, not even half, 3 of their away games, they make finals. They were close. They just need to somehow get wins away from home. Like the games that they were losing to, like North Melbourne, you can't lose to North Melbourne no matter what. You can't lose to North Melbourne. I know it's in Victoria, but you can't lose that. You lose to St Kilda where they're in dreadful form. Not good enough. They need to find a way to win. I don't know if Damien Hardwick needs the Gold Coast to sleep in planes over the off-season and see how they go, try to train them through that. But yeah, I think the Gold Coast, it's an E rating for me. The Saints, look, after the finals last year, some people may think that they should be worse off with their grading, but I'm going to give them a C. Now, I honestly think that they overachieved last year. I don't think they were anywhere near finals, and I think because they had such a great start to the year that they just scraped in there and they were making up the numbers last year. Now, yes, I think they had a very bad start to the season, but I do think that they really had a good second half to their year. They knocked off the Swans, the Cats, and they almost knocked the Blues out of the finals last week. Now, I think that the younger players really grew throughout this year, like Filippo, Owens at times looked pretty good. I'll be very interested to see how this off-season goes for the Saints as well. I'll be interested to see what they do with Max King as well. They look so much more dangerous in the latter parts of the year when Max King wasn't there. So I don't think they should get rid of him by any means, but they just need to find a way to use their other forwards because they are dangerous, but they don't use them better. They don't use them good enough. They just go to Max King and then they chuck 3 defenders on him and St Kilda can't score. Now on to Essendon. Now, if you judge them on the second half of their year, it's an absolute F rating for Essendon. They've dropped off yet again. It's another year, and I want to give them an F. I want to give Essendon an F, but I'm going to sit on an E rating because they had a very good start to the year, and I just don't know what's wrong with their second halves of their seasons because I think they had finals almost locked up halfway through the year, Essendon. They had some good signs, they had a good lineup, and they just they did it to themselves. They would not win games when they needed to. Games like the Gold Coast a couple of weeks ago, they kicked 1 goal 9 in the last quarter. Like, you've got to win that game. It's not good enough. Now, we've already seen a couple of list changes already made by Brad Scott, so it seems like this offseason is going to be really important for the Bombers. I thought that maybe last offseason when they picked up some players, there were some good signs, especially earlier in the year, but it seems like a lot of them didn't really perform that well, especially in the latter parts of the year. I think that there were some good signs for Essendon. Zach Merritt's one of the best captains in the comp. I don't care what anyone says. I think he's a really good player. Kyle Langford as well had a good year. Probably not as good as last year, but he still had a good year. I think there are some players that Essendon can use and go moving forward, but their second half of their season was absolutely dreadful. Now, after that, we get to Fremantle. Well, in the last month or so, you'd have to give Fremantle an F, wouldn't you? On the last month that they had. I know that they had a couple of injuries at the wrong time, like Pearce and Tracy, but Fremantle, all they had to do was get one win in the last month, and they would have made finals. So, I'm going to give Fremantle a C rating. Now, the reason why I'm doing that is because 20 rounds of the year, they were great. They were exceeding my expectations. I didn't see Fremantle making anywhere near the 8 this year. I thought they were going to be around that 10th, 11th, 12th mark, which they inevitably did finish. But they were brilliant this year. There were so many good signs for them. Hayden Young moving into the midfield, what a masterstroke that was. Jordan Clark, arguably All-Australian. They had some great midfielders moving through. And finally, I bet you there's almost so many Fremantle fans, thank God they've found a couple of key forwards to kick to. And they didn't have to spend 3 first-round draft picks on Logan McDonald. Because Josh Tracy, you would love him at any team. He's not only a really good kick for the footy when he goes for goal, but if he doesn't mark a contested mark, he brings the ball to ground. And so many teams are screaming for that. So Josh Tracy, such a good player. They missed him so much at the end of the year. Jai Amos, I know he didn't kick as well as he did the year before in front of goal, but I think that Jai Amos is definitely one to build into for the future as well. I mean, I think he kicked 35 plus goals this year. Another pre-season into him, he's going to be massive. I can't go higher than a C because the fact is, where they were sitting on the ladder, the Dockers, they should have been making finals 100%. You can't deny that. But I can't go any lower than a C because I think that they were amazing throughout the majority of this year. I don't think many people expected them to be as good as they were. And I think in this off-season is such an important, probably the most important off-season for Fremantle in their history. They've already been linked to a couple of players like Shea Bolton and Liam Baker. So we'll see how they go if they can pick them up. But if they can get them to, I think Fremantle are going to be one of the huge risers next year. So I think there's a lot to build off of. Now, the fact that they didn't make finals, they'll have a longer pre-season. They'll probably get an easier draw. The fact that they play in Perth is such a advantage for them, obviously. They don't lose many home games. So I think Fremantle are going to be a huge riser next year. And finally, Collingwood. Now, I know there was a lot of injuries to impact them this year, but they won a premiership last year. It has to be an F. This team was expected to, I don't know if they were going to go back to back, but people were expecting, I was expecting them to be right at the pointy end of the season. And it looked like, especially at the start of the season, that they were pretty content by just getting the one premiership. And look, I understand that is fine for a lot of players, but in an industry like the AFL, you've got to back it up. You got to, celebrate the highs, celebrate that sort of stuff, but also when the whips are cracking, you got to be there, and the Pies simply weren't. Other than Nick Dacos, Darcy Cameron, there weren't a lot of improvers this year, and I'll be interested to see how this off-season goes for Collingwood if they go and target a big key forward, because that is something they do need. I think that Daniel McStay, when he came back in those last month or so, I think he's definitely someone they can build off of as a key forward, but they do need someone to support him. I don't think Mason Cox is really that option. I just think that, especially he's aging now as well. So I'm interested to see what Collingwood do in this off-season. But guys, let me know down below what you would be giving gradings for some of these teams. Let me know what you think and where you think these sort of teams are going to be heading next year as well. Obviously, we usually missing the 8 one year and then actually potentially making the top 4. We got Geelong, who missed the 8 and then jumped back in. So I'm going to make a quick prediction now. I actually think Fremantle are going to be that team, and I think Adelaide will respond. I don't know if they'll make I think they can make the 8, the Adelaide Crows. That's a very early prediction, but I think that's also the case. Melbourne is my question mark right now.